this evening on cultivating a growth mindset. It's something that's quite close to my heart, and I think that we've got three fantastic speakers from PwC here today to speak about their experiences around what cultivates a growth mindset for them. And what I thought I'd do first of all, before we get into the questions, which is really the interesting part, I thought I'd just share a couple of slides just to frame what growth mindset is and how that's positioned. So if you could move the slides along, please, Monica, that'd be great. So what is a growth mindset? And I think that the fact that you're here probably means that you already have a growth mindset. And however, as individuals, we can grow mindsets in some areas, and we can often have fixed mindset in other areas. And you often get the comparison between what's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Individuals who believe their talents can be developed through hard work, good strategies, and input from others have a growth mindset. They tend to achieve more than those with a more fixed mindset, those who believe that their talents are innate gifts. This is because they worry less about looking smart and they put more energy into learning. And I think that's one of the real things about a growth mindset is no matter what you do in your life, and careers often take a kind of a phase of learning, earning, and returning. And as you get probably to my age, it's more about returning. But what often people forget is that there should be another word on the end, which is repeat, because you often go back to learning, and that's how you really do develop and keep that growth mindset throughout your career. Go to the next slide, please, Monica. So the actual, I guess the background to growth mindset actually comes from a professor, Carol Dweck at Stanford. I was actually quite lucky to study at Stanford a number of years ago, and there's quite a good lot of thinking from design thinking to growth mindset that come out of Stanford. And I think the original research that was conducted around growth mindset coined this term around growth and fixed mindsets, as we've discussed before, and describing really what the underlying beliefs are about learning and intelligence. And what Carol did is she did a very insightful TED talk, which you can watch, and it will be shared in the resource pack after this talk, which gives you a little bit more of an understanding about the topic. And it's a really interesting one. I really urge you to take the time to listen to Carol's TED talk after this session today. Go to the next slide. Thanks, Monica. So growth versus fixed mindset. And I'm not going to spend time going through all of these, but these are just some really good examples of what the difference is between growth and fixed mindsets. And, this will go back to the fact, if you think about it yourselves, do you actually recognize your belief systems in any of these statements? And you probably may do. Some of them will probably be hopefully on the left or the growth side, but there may be a couple of them also that are on the right-hand side in that fixed, that fixed mindset state. So just take a couple of seconds to have a look at those and reflect on them, and maybe that may frame some of your questions for later on when we get to the questions from the audience after we hear from our exciting guests. Next slide, please, Monica. So why cultivate a growth mindset? For self-improvement, it's probably one thing. Things about things you want to achieve. That's another reason why people often have a growth mindset. And what reasons do you give yourself for not making progress towards achieving those goals? Do they look like some of the beliefs in the fixed mindset column that we've just looked at before? So really cultivating that growth mindset could help you really start working towards those goals and achieving them in a much more productive way and a much more defined and intent-based way as well. And with any of these things, care underpins everything. And what I'm hoping you'll learn over the next hour with our panelists is that they'll be sharing their unique experiences on how they've cultivated their growth mindsets. And that's how that's really helped them through their careers. And you'll see the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. And you should hopefully gain some insights from this session around how really growth mindsets can really help shape your careers. And at the end, you'll have the resource pack as we spoke about, which will give you some more details and some more information around how you can start to cultivate your own growth mindset and work your plan towards that success you're looking for. So that's just a quick I guess, framing of what growth mindset is. And I think, without further ado, I'd like to now get to the questions, I guess, and to introduce our panel. So I'm really excited that the three colleagues that will be talking today. The first one I will introduce is Abiola Olaore. The second one will be Ben Ogene. And the third one will be Stephanie Odumosu Evans. And all three of them I do know to some extent, some more than others, but they've all got some really exciting insights to share with you today. But first of all, as a bit of an icebreaker, as they introduce themselves, I'm going to ask you as you introduce yourselves, and I'm going to go in order, Abiola first, then Ben, and then Stephanie. I'm going to ask you one quick question before you kind of introduce what you do. The question for you is, what are you currently watching on Netflix, or what is the current podcast you're listening to? So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Abiola for you to go first.
Okay, so nice to meet everyone. So I guess, Tunji, the question with regards to Netflix or podcast, I'm going to go towards Netflix. I'm actually watching a Korean series called The Last Empress. The main reason why I'm watching Korean films is I just got to a phase where I probably watched quite a few movies from different cultural backgrounds, such as China and Nigerian films. So I'm just getting to a space where I just need to diversify it. So I'm currently watching a Korean series, so I'll definitely recommend everyone to watch it. So in terms of just my background, I think I'm probably going to basically go from graduation, just so that everyone understands what my career journey is and what I actually do now. So for everyone on the call, I basically graduated from Loughborough University, studying international relations. I came to this country, the UK, when I was 7, so I couldn't actually speak English. So since then, I had a curiosity for the world of international relations. After graduation, if you want me to be honest, I was in a phase where I was basically just exploring myself in terms of my strengths. So that led me to actually go to Malaysia for a year and actually work there just to understand what I want to do. And then since then, I've basically started to build my career within sales, business development, and technology. And I'm currently in the team at PwC working in an amazing team, a new team, which focuses on sales and products. So hopefully that's a mini overview of what I do at PwC.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Abiola. Like that, and indeed, we won't go into too much details, but you're in a great team, and not because it's my team, but it is a great team. So, I'm going to move over to you, Ben, and ask you the same opening question around podcast or Netflix that you're watching. But my question for you is, how important is it finding your passions and interests?
Good question. So a bit embarrassingly, I'm not like Abiola in spreading out culturally. The last thing I watched was Judas and the Black Messiah. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a pretty good movie. I don't think I'm either one of those characters, hopefully. But I'm also listening to Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you know about him, but he does neuroscience and really talks about neuroplasticity and things like that. It's quite interesting. Yeah, so my background is that I was born in Sweden, in Stockholm, Sweden, to Nigerian parents, and learned English for the first time properly when I moved to where my parents are from in Nigeria at 11, and then moved to the UK at 17. I would say relearned another type of English, because it's two different English that you learn. And when I came to the UK, my first job was working McDonald's, so literally flipping burgers at the back of McDonald's. Went to university at King's College, and I studied computer science at King's, and did odd jobs here and there, like security jobs and things like that. Now I have spent my professional career mainly within the Big Four. And at PwC, I am a director in our people and organizations practice. And it's mainly around digital analytics solutions, moving into the world of analytics, machine learning, and robotics process automation, things like that. What was your question? It was
It was about finding your passion and interests, and what how
yeah.
important is that for you?
Yeah, I think it's critical. So what I studied at university is a lot to do with computer science, and I hated every minute of it. Right, I didn't like coding. I hope none of my uni people are on, but I didn't like computer scientists in general. Didn't really socialize very much with them. Um, but now I absolutely love what I do, because I have more context around what I do. And because I have more context around what I do, I spend my spare time studying the very latest in the world of machine learning and things like that, which I never would have done back in the day when I was studying it. Because now I can see the value that it brings to our practice, and I can also see how high demand those skills are. But I think that if you don't find the thing that you're really passionate about, then studying and growing and learning about it becomes much harder. So one of my key messages is to find love.
Great, thanks, Ben, and yeah, absolutely pertinent as well. Stephanie, over to you, and same question about podcast or Netflix. And as you kind of introduced your background, did you always know you wanted to do law?
Cool. All right. Thanks, Sinji. So, hi everyone. So my name is Stephanie Odemusu-Evans, and I'm a senior manager at PwC. In terms of the question about which podcast, which TV program, I'd say they're probably the same. So I'm a big fan of Line of Duty, and like 10 million of the rest of the country on Sunday, I also tuned in to watch the first episode of the new series, which I loved. And as a sort of addition to that, I also listened to the BBC Sounds podcast about Line of Duty, to kind of get my recap and like hear people's views on it. So a bit sad, but kind of one of the same. Yeah, I do like a good crime drama. So I guess in terms of my background and my story, so I guess it's linked to, the question about law and, how I know I always wanted to do it. And yes, the short answer is yes, I have always actually wanted to do law. And, I spent a lot of my childhood reading lots of legal novels, watching legal films. If anyone's watched A Few Good Men, it's one of my favourite films, an amazing courtroom drama at the end. If you haven't watched it, watch it tonight. Doing things like that. And I just really kind of enjoyed it. I did quite a few different sort of work experience placements when I was, at school, year 11, sixth form. I studied AS level law, which I really, really enjoyed. And that really sort of cemented for me my passion to study law at university. After university, I ended up falling into law, obviously, or not obviously, but I did an internship at an immigration law firm. And then after that, I worked there. And then after that, after a few years, I moved to PwC and been here ever since. I think the thing for me is that there's lots of routes to law. And, I think if anyone here is listening in, yes, I knew at a young age I wanted to do law. And, throughout my sort of formative years, as it were, everything seemed to be quite sort of legally focused, from the work experience to the, AS levels to the degree. But that doesn't have to be the case at all. Last year I was mentoring somebody who was in their 50s, and they had always worked in insurance, and they decided at that age they wanted to do, pivot and look into law. And I spent a lot of time with him kind of thinking, there's lots of routes to law. You can kind of do the degree, you can kind of do, obviously some other subject, you can do a conversion course, you can become a legal executive, you can, a lot of what we do actually in my team in immigration, there's a lot of sort of project management, consultancy, all that kind of thing. So there's lots of different ways to get involved in law. And law aside, I think if you are still figuring out what your interests are in life and what it is that is your passion, don't feel that you need to have all the answers now. It can happen at any time, at any point. So, yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I have to ask you this. Have you ever used that line from A Few Good Men? You can't handle the truth.
I wish.
I had to ask. Great film, though. Great film. So, thank you, all three of you, for letting us get to know you a little bit more about your background and interest. We're going to move on to the next section, which is around continuous learning. And first question is for you, actually, Ben. How much does continuous learning factor into your day-to-day life?
It does a lot. And I'll first of all put it into context. So very very early in my career, I felt a little bit like certain people had more privileges than me at work. And the way I dealt with that mentally probably wasn't the right way. So the way I dealt with it is there's me here in terms of opportunities I have and somebody else there. And I would get frustrated and angry and sometimes more and more introverted. And that didn't ever help me get there. But what I found worked is that amassing really valuable skills and things that I'm stronger at helped me get up there in terms of opportunities. And to be honest, in some certain cases there, right? So that's a little bit of context around that importance. In terms of how it factors into my day-to-day life, like most people with careers like ours, my calendar is absolutely full throughout the day. So I have to wake up a bit earlier and do a little bit of studying. I don't try to do 2-3 hours every day. I set myself a target. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's half an hour before the workday starts. Unlike some of the careers, the world of technology, the world we're in changes all the time. So you have to stay up to date. I also find a way to reward myself if I do it properly. And I think that's all quite important. That sometimes we're quite hard on ourselves, but it's important to reward yourself. So I've got a bit of a sweet tooth, and probably that's not the right answer, but that's how I reward myself if I've actually done my chores, which is to wake up early and do a little bit of studying. The other thing that I think is quite important is certain people rely on discipline, and it may work for them. It doesn't necessarily work for me. So it has to be a habit, a little bit like a habit of brushing your teeth when you wake up, or checking for your keys before you leave your house. My habit is, once I've had my shower in the morning, the first thing is to switch up my machine and then do a little bit of studying. And that works far better than trying to force myself through self-discipline.
Cool. Great. Yeah, and I totally resonate with that. I think little but often is certainly a way that I tend to learn. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ben. Abiola, on to you actually. So I've got a question for you. So how do you approach learning?
Of course. So for me, I usually basically put it down into two areas. One, which is learning because I'm just a very curious woman. And the second is just not basically thinking outside the box and thinking global. So taking those two approaches have actually allowed me to, execute that within my life. So what I'm going to do is actually probably break down those two elements and the approaches that I take and how it's actually been fruitful at work and outside of work. So in terms of curiosity, I know I mentioned, similar to probably Ben's experience, I was actually raised in Brussels. So when I came to the UK, I could only speak French, Flemish. So because of that curiosity, I was always interested to know about why people were different. So as I was going through the whole journey of university and even after that, I started to be more curious about Asia relations and Africa. And because of the interest in terms of, thinking more global and seeing where the world is going, sparked my interest to actually be more proactive and actually search online for leadership programs and sponsored programs. So because of that proactiveness, I've actually been able to travel to China over 4 times and actually complete leadership programs related to technology, specifically robotics, and actually thinking about how technology and fintech applies to the global world. So hopefully that's an example of my how my curiosity has worked in my favor. And for anyone in the call who's even just raised in the UK, just, don't be afraid to be curious and use that global element to always take you outside of your comfort zone, so that when you do come back to the UK, you are probably at a certain level in terms of mindset because you're able to see things in a different light. So yeah, in other words, I think my parents were probably raising me in another country and then having to come here to be curious. So the second approach that I usually take to learning is being vocal and at the same time thinking global. So I know I've probably explained curiosity and having a global mindset, but I'm actually now going to talk about global business and how that's how that approach has also helped me at work. So in work, basically, for those who don't know, PwC is a very global firm, and I've been able to basically express certain areas of interest and actually showcase how I'm able to apply some of my external knowledge with the business. And as obviously many disclaim, it just depends which firm you work for, but the experience I've had, I've been able to have the opportunity to be in teams that actually have those international counterparts. So as a result of that, I actually completed an international secondment with a team that actually allowed me to go to Nigeria, Senegal. I've been able to go to Ivory Coast PwC office. So with that experience and being global and actually vocal, I know that rhymes, but hopefully that gets you going. So that approach has allowed me to actually experience that at work. So to answer your question, Tunji, about just my approach to continuous learning, I just narrow it down to curiosity and at the same time thinking global.
No, I totally get that, Abiola, and I think when I reflect on my career, it's allowed me to live and work in Russia, Dubai, the US, a couple of times, in fact, and in Africa. So I think that curiosity really does open up your mindset, especially globally, and gives you a much better appreciation. And as a leader, I certainly find it's a valuable experience to have had. So Stephanie, I'm going to move over to you. In your role, you often have to be very, you have to learn new laws very, very quickly in other countries in order to advise clients. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I guess I probably didn't cover this in my intro, but I work specifically in the immigration team, and I focus on global immigration. So similar to what Abiola was saying, I work a lot with our different network offices all around the world, pretty much, on a daily basis. So, not only is it multiple countries and multiple offices, and learning the laws in those countries and the regulations, the laws themselves are constantly changing. And that's kind of the nature of immigration. Again, similar, Ben was saying, technology is constantly moving. Immigration is exactly the same. It never stays static. We often sort of joke that no 2 days in immigration are ever the same, because, whilst one day, you could have advised somebody that literally the next month the rules could have changed, and it sometimes can be a bit of a kind of funny situation, because you get people emailing you saying, well, hang on, I know so-and-so who went for the exact same process last week. Why are you now saying it's going to take 6 months when it took that person 2 months? Like, it's immigration for you. It changes. So that's, a sort of client service learning in and of itself. But I'd say with immigration, aside from the laws and, the regulations and that sort of stuff, it's a really personal area of law. You're dealing with individuals, it's their personal lives, their specific circumstances. You're picking them up and moving them, and not just them, often their families, to a new place. And it's, personal life, careers on the line, and all that kind of thing. So really is a new challenge pretty much every time that we turn up to work, really. And, we're always sort of kept on our toes. So I would say a big part of that for me is never becoming too fixated on doing something in just one way, staying agile, always thinking, okay, fine, I did it that way last week, this week it might be this way, just because of who you're dealing with or the laws or whatever it might be. I also think, in addition to the traditional, more formal learning, so, reading new immigration bills or the regulations, I think it's really important that we also remember the continuous sort of professional life, as it were, learnings that we do. So that learning from your peers, or learning from, people that are more senior than you in your job, engaging with, just staying, engaged with the news and the issues of the day, really. And it's all about bringing that back to your specific field and your area, because I truly believe it will always make for a richer conversation with your clients, and how you kind of tackle those situations that they might bring to you and whatever the problems might be. And that's not just a law or a legal thing. I think that's in everything we do, just sort of bringing that sort of geopolitical lens to what we do, and then applying that to what we're doing, and then speaking to our clients. So I just would say definitely keep learning, definitely keep engaging, and hopefully you won't go wrong.
Brilliant, great, thanks for that insight, Stephanie. You're absolutely right. I think in the area of law you're in with in immigration, it is a very personal thing, and it can be life-changing for people one way or the other. So yeah, that agility to be able to switch and be able to navigate that is absolutely key. So we're going to move on to our third section, actually, which is around challenges. And I always say that I don't really learn much about people when I work with them during the good times, but I learn everything about them during the more challenging times, because then you see their ability to navigate that and how they cope with that. And I'm really always fascinated when there are crises to see how leaders' behaviors can change and how they lead their people or themselves during those times. So this section for me is quite interesting to see the answers we get back from our panelists. So, and keeping it in that context around the growth mindset. So Ben, I'm going to start with you. So what helps you to bounce back when things are going badly?
There are probably two things I would say to that. One is I know it's easy to say, but I don't think failure is always a bad thing. If I think about one of the greatest technology innovators that ever lived, Nikola Tesla, he said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that it doesn't work, right? So carried on going. A similar sort of response came from Michael Jordan, where he says, I've missed 9,000 shots, and that's why I'm successful. So one of the things that I've been doing in my early morning trainings actually has to do with what Steph does. I know Steph probably hasn't seen my demo yet, but it's effectively automating immigration applications, which we think will become more and more popular with Brexit in terms of a service. And there's a letter that goes with that immigration application. So I've been developing a bot that does that automation. And I can't tell you how many times it's broken down, right? And just when I think I'm ready to show off my new innovation to someone in Steph's team, something happens. The web page changes and breaks down. I have to start again. But I think that's part of the normal process. So I embrace failure in that way. There's failure that I don't embrace. The failure that I don't embrace is when it's on me, right? So for example, for me to get up at 6 in the morning, I need to go to bed at a certain time. And there's always temptations. It could be Netflix, it could be, before lockdown, it could be some sort of a social event. And so the days where I wake up on a weekend and I'm too hungover to do my studying, that's on me. So the former type of failure I embrace. The latter, I'm always pretty strict with myself. So I have I think many people do this, but I have a way of writing down where I want to be in 2 or 3 years' time. And I write that down. I try to write that down every day. It doesn't always happen. And then at the end of the day, I write down what have I done to move closer to that bend, and what have I done to mess up. And usually on my mess up list is I've been up late, or I've had it wandering too many. So there's the failure that I embrace and the failure that I don't.
So it's around that personal accountability for the things that are in your control, really, that you kind of focus on and own that. That's very insightful. Thanks, Ben. Abiola, I'm going to come over to you next. So question for you, what has been the most challenging experience that you've come across, and how did you get through it?
Okay, that's a good question. So I'm going to probably take an approach where I'm answering to the point where it's probably my work experience, and then probably just touch lightly on outside of work. So again, this answer is not, again, exclusively just PwC experience, just as my whole corporate career. So for me, because I'm first generation here, and for me, probably I come from a family that probably encourages that drive. With the challenges that I've had within my corporate life so far is probably perceptions in terms of probably a point blank question always asks about, oh, which private school did I go to, basically. I think whenever I tend to share my what's made me, a lot of people are quite surprised by probably some of the places I've been to or programs. So usually, even outside of work as well, I still get that to just say, okay, which private school did you go to? Or what did your parents do? Or it must mean that your dad or your mother has a connection with someone. And even though probably the people who are asking me those questions might intentionally or not intentionally say it, for me that's been a challenge, because the way I live life is just bring your true self to work and just basically live your best life. And not to say that has to be related to money, but I think from a well-being perspective, you do have to be your best self, just to keep sane and just peace of mind. So when, you know, I get those type of questions that still come up from time to time, it still surprises me because it makes me even more motivated to change probably some people's perceptions as to why some people get certain opportunities, and then at the same time encourage people that, you know, I came from somewhere and I still had the opportunity to actually travel and actually be exposed to a very good firm and other firms that I may have worked that I've worked for in the past. So to answer your question, I would definitely say the challenges about the whole perception of how I've been brought up. And usually when I've had those experiences, I've actually been usually the only woman of color, especially in my experience with China and Malaysia way back. But I'm the type of person, I use it to my favor. So I'll make sure they remember me. I'm not too sure how whoever's in the call in terms of what ethnic group you fall under, but regardless of what ethnic group you fall under, just use it in your advantage so that they can actually remember me. Even my name is different. So usually, even if you're Nigerian, some people know that Abiola is a male or female name. Even when I was working in the Africa Business Group, there's perception of, apart from obviously seeing my picture, it might be a male, or even if it's I'm the only woman of color, probably getting those stares or actually, oh, your parents must have hooked you up with this opportunity. So in short, be your best self, and at the same time use those challenges, similar to what Ben said, to actually motivate you. And I feel that that's where you have the power, instead of probably someone in a scenario making me feel a different way, which would have taken away my power. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of the challenges that I've experienced.
Yeah, it did. And I think the lesson from that, Abiola, and thank you, is probably around authenticity and maintaining that, and not flexing or changing who you are, and owning your identity around that. And certainly going abroad, China, I remember when I went to Russia for the first time, that was an experience as a black person. But I knew when I went there, there have been many black people, certainly during the communist era. A lot of African countries sent lots of students there to study and go back. So it wasn't as if I was the first, but you still got those looks on the street. But I owned it, and I was quite comfortable. So no, thanks for sharing that, Abiola. Stephanie, I'm going to come over to you. And prior to the pandemic, in your role, you traveled a lot. So how do you approach delivering and performing in this new and unfamiliar environment that we're in now, in this Zoom environment we now find ourselves in?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on the session and what I was going to sort of say to this particular sort of area. And I think I kind of worked out that I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment, as I think I've always actually lent into unfamiliar environments and sort of challenging new situations and things. And I always think back to when I was at university, and as I explained, I did law at university, but I did law of French. So I spent a year of my degree in France. And I just always remember this, where like everybody else in our group had moved into the sort of a university accommodation that was all sort of set up through our universities, and you kind of just signed a form and moved in. But for some reason, me and my friend decided, we wanted the full French experience. So no, we weren't going to do that. We were going to find our own private flat and we'll deck it out and we'll do it all and it'd be absolutely fine. Have to say that those first 3 months were not quite as smooth as we thought they would be, because we kind of completely just lent into the unknown. We thought, oh, okay, we're sort of third year university students, we're fluent, we can do this. We were not fluent in French at all. So, we're busy there trying to negotiate rents and negotiate, a secondhand fridge or a cooker for our flats and ringing the EDF and all the rest of it. It's hard enough in English when you're in your electricity company, let alone then, but sort of did it anyway. And I have to say, it came to the end of that year and it was a fantastic year. I think by doing that, yes, it was uncomfortable at first. I definitely got a much richer, I think, experience. And we kind of did live that French experience. All our neighbours were French. I definitely felt my language kind of picked up a lot quicker than, it would have done had I just been with the rest of the sort of English students. So yeah, that story is just one that always resonates. And, I guess it's a mindset that's followed me up till now, really. I love learning, and experiencing new things and just really seeing myself develop and grow. Ben touched on getting feedback that's challenging, and I think it's really important to lean into that, because that is where you grow. You know, everybody can receive that fan mail of, oh, you've done a great job, you've done a great job, brilliant, we all love it. But it's actually the stuff we don't love so much that gives us that reaction, and that's that space where we kind of are pushed and we're challenged. I mean, don't get me wrong, it can be absolutely daunting and absolutely terrifying when you do these things, you know, just thinking about a work context. As you said, I used to travel a lot when we were in pre-COVID world, and you know, often I'd be getting off a plane in China or Malaysia or wherever it was and be expected to be in a meeting within 2 hours and presenting to people I'd never met before on a client pitch or whatever it might be. So absolutely terrifying. But you know, I think there's that expectation that, you know, you'll just show up and you'll bring your best self to that moment. So I think, you know, on reflection, I think my advice would be, based on my experiences, is that provided you've put the work in and, you know, you've prepared as well as possible and as, you know, as much as you can, you just have to go in with that belief to these situations, like you really do. And, you know, I think I deign to promise that 9 times out of 10, it will never be as bad as you think it will be. It just won't. And, you know, and even if it is, it's often just a little bit of uncomfortableness. And then you'll soon start sort of thinking, oh, okay, I've got this, I can do this. So that would be, you know, my main piece of advice. And, you know, when I think to this year, we've all had to adapt. We've all had to do it. You know, many of you on this call, you know, we've all navigated the new normal of working in lockdown, homeschooling, you know, all the rest of it. That's all been completely new. And so really, I think we'd all be surprised at our ability to cope with challenge and also unfamiliarity when it presents itself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Stephen. I think one of the things I always reflect on is the fact that you should just try something. And I think it goes back to something a leader told me many years ago, which was knowledge, confidence, risk. We always said, you know, if you have a bit of knowledge, it gives you the confidence. If you have confidence, it gives you the ability to take that risk. And often the risk is where you get that differentiation and you grow because it's a new experience. So yeah, I totally get that. Right, we're going to move on to the last section, and I want to make sure we leave a bit of time for some questions for the audience. So this is the last section around experiences and advice, and this is some nuggets that you can give to the audience that are listening in today. I'm going to do it in reverse order, actually. So as you seem to have gone last most of the time, Stephanie, I'm going to ask you first. You know, you've always known you'd wanted to do law and you found your purpose early, but what's kept you passionate for doing law for so long?
Yeah, I'd almost look at this as almost not a law thing anymore. I think there's something around, you kind of have this notion in your mind as you're kind of growing up in your formative years and you kind of formally do your academic training and all the rest of it. And then you actually start doing a job, and it's the job that keeps me passionate. You know, I almost don't see it as law that's kept me kind of, you know, hooked in. It's the job that I do, and the speaking to people and the relationships and the clients and the solving problems. I think, you know, at PwC, we're really kind of well positioned for that, you know, and I feel quite lucky to work for an organization where you're truly encouraged to be this sort of holistic business advisor. So it's almost impossible to get bored, because yes, whilst I have my area of speciality, which is, you know, immigration law, actually when I speak to my clients, they're telling me their issues. And, you know, it goes back to the point I was making earlier around, you know, engaging with geopolitics, engaging with the issues of the day. And we have that conversation. And yes, it might be something that's directly linked to immigration, but it might often be something like, oh, you know, we're having this, I don't know, employment law issue, or we're having this tax issue, or, you know, we heard that there's this big merger happening, we need some kind of transfer pricing. You know, there's so many things, and you just make those connections, because that's the beauty of, you know, sort of working for a professional services firm, and it's how we're sort of encouraged to work. So I'd say, yeah, so I'd say it's constantly evolving. So I think my job hasn't stayed static, and not just because of the area of law that I do. I think just generally the world of work is constantly changing. And I've been, you know, again, I guess quite lucky to have really interesting clients that have always challenged me. They've challenged my thinking. I've taken up client secondments where I've been on site for sort of 9 months, and again, sort of absorbing a whole new way of working, a whole new organization. It's almost like, you know, sort of having a new job and then coming back, you know. So it's definitely been something that's been kept quite dynamic, I'd say. And so in terms of advice, I'd say, you know, really embrace that change, you know, really embrace cycles of experience if you get the opportunity to do them. That's something I'm currently doing. So whilst I kind of still obviously do immigration law, I'm actually spending 50% of my time as the chief of staff and the network driver for legal. So that was, again, that came around from me taking a chance, really. I kind of ummed and ahed for ages around contacting our head of legal at the time to say, look, really interested in doing something, slightly different, is there anything, that's available? And I ummed and ahed, and I was like, nope, I've just got to do it. So I put the time in his diary, and it's the best conversation I ever had. I was so scared and so worried about it, but actually once it came down to it, he was really kind of pleased and happy to see me. And he was like, oh, great, I'll definitely keep you in mind. We're thinking about, doing something like this. And the role that I'm doing, it didn't actually exist in our legal business before. And, purely through having that conversation, it was like, oh, yes, okay. And so here we are. And I've been doing it for, almost 2 years now, and I really, really enjoy it. I've learned so many, amazing skills. And, it's really sort of enhanced me in my professional development. And definitely once I've kind of finished it, absolutely got so many skills to bring back to my sort of day job in the immigration practice, which is kind of what we always want to be doing, right? We always want to be doing that continuous learning, that continuous challenging ourselves, that continuous, new problem to solve, as it were. And so, yeah, I'd say as a sort of final piece, because the same one time, it's just acknowledging that we're always growing and developing. I don't think there's ever a tick box of, oh, right, I've completed it now, I've completed professional life, finished. No, it doesn't exist. And, even when you're at the very top of, as you say, top of your career, if you're a partner or whatever, there's still growth, there's still other opportunities, there's still ways to kind of keep that mindset alive and become, the best you can be. So
totally agree, Steph. Thank you. Abiola, I'm going to ask you, what is your biggest piece of career advice you could give, or advice generally, but and in the context of growth mindset? And I'm going to limit you to about 60 seconds, if that's all right.
Okay, so probably you'll notice I always probably take a certain analogy to things. That's how I approach it, but I'm just going to say in terms of the topic of growth mindset, I usually keep things simple. So I'm thinking about either building my story or educating others. So one of the challenges that I actually experienced was I was in a team that had a UK priority, but managed to get, let's say, an international sort of comment from it, and came back. But because the team had more of a UK focus, the challenge that I experienced was how to educate them from what I learned from a global scale. So in terms of just how I was able to articulate that to them, I used that as an opportunity to educate them. So I know I mentioned build your story, educate others. So I took the educate others approach. So when I took that approach, I actually did a lunch and learns, and actually started to speak to internal stakeholders to say, actually, you know what, I know our priority is UK, but I just wanted to let you know this is what happened in Africa, and this is what the priority was in the Middle East. Even though we're not focusing on it straight away, let's just bear this in mind from a cultural stance. And I guess probably one of the results from it was I was actually able to then work on just a mini short project that involved Mumbai, clients from Mumbai. So hopefully in those 60 seconds I've answered that. But in short, I was able to basically take an approach where I educate others if it's not immediately working for me, and then using that as an opportunity to then build my story to then get me into where I would like to see myself.
Brilliant, I love that. I'll keep that in mind. Educate. I like that. And Ben, over to you. What's the most valuable thing you've learned from a colleague or a client?
I would say, well, Steph and Abiola have alluded to the international nature of our roles. I'll tell you a very quick story. I was sent to Frankfurt in Germany to go and speak to a bank about our technology, and arrived there a week early, and we did a lot of prep over and over again over the space of about 4 days. For this pitch felt like 5 hours long. And we prepared really, really well. I started off my pitch. I have some stock jokes that I have in my script normally. And the first couple of them just dived, like no one laughed. So I thought, okay, scrap your jokes in the scripts and just carry on. And we had a very, very tiny break in the piece. And it was a hard pitch, very well prepared. The next one was in Milan, working with PwC Italy. And the lead partner, his name is Paolo. So I've landed in Milan, gone to the hotel, changed, gone to the client office, and Paolo is late. So I'm standing in reception trying to get Wi-Fi to demo my tech. And when Paolo turns up, I said, Paolo, you're late. This is a really important pitch for you. And he goes, "Hey, Ben, don't worry. It's about the feelings, about the relationships and things." So we get into the client pitch, no Wi-Fi, no demos whatsoever. I don't understand what they're talking about half of the time. When they say Ben, they're speaking to me. When they say Benne, they're saying yes, but I think they're talking to me and I'm all confused. And after about 10 minutes in, they call a break and go for a cappuccino. The pitch is only 2 hours long and we went for a cappuccino break for half an hour. At the end of it, we lost the pitch in Frankfurt and we won the pitch in Milan. And Paolo rings me up and goes, "See, I told you, it's more about relationships, not about your skills and your tech." So I think the biggest lesson I've learned in my time is that one from Paolo around, yes, it's good to upskill yourself and be ready when the chance comes, but actually the way you interact with people in your relationships is at least as valuable as everything else. Oh, you're on mute, G.
I'm on mute, yeah. I was getting pinged, so I thought I'd switch off for a bit. That's a great lesson, Ben, and I think I would translate that as being that real balance between EQ and IQ. So there gets to a time when your competency, your technical competency, and your ability in your role matters, but not as much as your emotional intelligence and reading a room and understanding culture and how people are. So I think that's a great kind of way to close on the panel discussion, because I think for all of you, I think that's one of the biggest learnings, is getting the balance right between IQ and EQ. And if you get that right, you know, you really do expand that growth mindset as well, because you'll learn more and get more opportunity. So I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you for that session from you, Abiola, Stephanie, and Ben. It's been fantastic. We've got a couple of questions. We've got about 10 minutes. So we've got some audience questions. So I'm going to have a very quick look at what we've got come in. And the first one is from Jane, and it's, what's your advice on challenging imposter syndrome when you're growing your mindset? Very good question, Jane. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Stephanie, do you want to have a go at that first?
Yeah, no, sure. And I think it's one that's, plagued me lots of times. And, you know, every time I've lent into something new, be it, like I said, a client secondment or leading a pitch or something like that, or my new role, you know, the fact I'm kind of doing this hybrid role and leading our business, you know, I don't have any experience of doing that. It's completely new. All I can say is it's terrifying, but linked to the point I was kind of making earlier, I think if you've done as much due diligence and just done as much sort of prep as you can, you know, before I took on the role or even kind of broached the topic of that role, I spoke to a lot of people. I kind of spoke to people who I knew were doing sort of similar things in other businesses within PwC. I kind of spoke to the leaders in my, you know, particular team to say, oh, you know, what are your thoughts on this sort of thing? How does it land? What sort of skills do you learn? And so I really felt like I'd kind of tried to equip myself as much as I could with as much information as, you know, possible before kind of leaning into it. But as I say, it was terrifying. I'm not, there's no two ways about it. And I think, you know, you just have to sometimes lean into that fear, because I think every single time I've done that, I've not once regretted it. I really haven't. It's always been something that's brought me to where I am. And I think even those experiences, as again, I was sort of mentioning earlier, that maybe I felt weren't, you know, that positive or didn't go that well, I've still learned something from them, and it's still kind of shaped how I've then proceeded, you know, to do something else. And I'd be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll, you know, look a bit more into that, or look a bit more into, you know, whatever it might be. So I hope that answers the question. That's how I've approached it in my career.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. That's brilliant. And yes, I think you have. And thanks for the question again, Jane, as well. I'm going to move on to another question that's come in from Ziaskia. And it's on the topic of challenges and how do you conquer a fear of failure before any given project? And maybe Ben, I'll give that one to you.
I always have a little bit of fear, and I'm not sure you can always conquer it. But I think it's accepting it's going to be there. I like to visualize, and believe me, it doesn't always work. But if it's a really high stake meeting, really important meeting, in my head, I'll visualizing going really, really well. The kind of feedback they'll be giving about me, sometimes I write it down, right? You heard me say this earlier on, but it sounds a bit strange from a technology person to say I get a piece of pen and paper and write down my thoughts. what would this look like if this went fantastically well? And I was reading the feedback, and I write that feedback. And that helps a little bit in terms of conquering the fear, but I don't think you can get away from it. And actually, it's part of evolution. We're supposed to have a bit of fear in us. And it helps with our sort of neurochemistry when we're going to these situations to be more alert. So I would say embrace it, but also do what you can to mitigate it.
Brilliant, thanks, Ben. Fabiola, Steph, anything you want to add to that question before we move on to the next one? Any pointers from yourselves?
I think Ben's actually just answered it really well, in terms of just really thinking and just the power of actually planning ahead as well, and still being aware for plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then whenever anything comes up, you know how to react. So that's what I would probably just add to Ben's point.
Cool. Thanks, Fabiola. Right, got another question here, which is from Parayese. And to facilitate you in the development of your career, would you say there was a point where you stopped focusing on refining on your areas of improvements and instead began to leverage or hone on your strengths? If so, what advice would you give to help people identify their superpowers or strengths? It's a good question, actually, and I'm a big fan of Marcus Buckingham, who any of you out there that are into strength finders. So this is a great question, and I'm going to, Fabiola, I'm going to let you have a stab at this first, and I'll probably get both Ben and Stephanie to add to it as well, because it's a great question.
Yeah, and thank you to whoever sent that question. I think that question is powerful. So how I position this whole topic of superpower is, first of all, just understanding yourself as a man or woman. In terms of personality types, I know that sounds very deep, but you honestly need to know if you're an introvert, extrovert, and then just own it. And the reason why I say that is because for me, I'm, for example, an extrovert. So with my let's say superpowers, I always knew from a young age that I loved anything to do with anything to do with international relations. I love to talk, and I'm very I feel like I'm very strong at people engagement, basically, and I've come to a stage where I can actually own that. So because of those three areas of confidence, which again, as a disclaimer, it's taken time. It's taken time in terms of the emotions, all the way down to just getting to a point where it's be my best self. So with that specific approach that I did, personality, owning my three strengths, I then took it upon myself to say, actually, what careers actually encourage me and feed into that strength, instead of thinking about things that weren't really working. And an example I can give, for example, with my personal experience with PwC, even before starting PwC, I knew that I was very passionate about financial literacy. And I always find myself speaking to my peers about how we're going to basically build money and how we're going to build generational wealth. And because of my social network, I actually have friends from different cultures. So I was always intrigued to see, actually, this person said their mom and dad is doing this, or actually this person said they got this inheritance. So because I was thinking, actually, I can combine my strength of talking to others and educating others, I then took it upon myself to build a community platform, which is actually basically having over basically 5,000 millennials on that platform. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of, I actually dedicated time to use the opportunity to push that platform, speak to others, and actually get them into it. And I didn't waste time probably thinking too much of the things I'm not really good at, which would have affected probably me even building this platform. So the only reason why I've probably given that example, Tunji, and whoever asked that question, is because when it comes to working outside of work, you still want to still bring what you're really good at and just combine it.
Cool.
And that's what, yeah, that's my answer.
Great. Thanks, Fabiola. And I've got one more question. I'm just looking at the clock. We've got about 4 minutes. So just quickly, I was going to say on that question, Ben, Stephanie, anything you wanted to add around strengths and superpowers?
Conscious of time, so yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No problem. I'll ask the last question. And the last question, and thank you for the last question, Parry. It's a great question. Last question is from Rita. And Rita's question is, in developing and accessing a growth mindset, what top tip would you offer to others? E.g., how do you place risk in carrying out your day tasks? So I'll give that question, and if maybe in a minute and a bit. Steph and Ben, you could probably give one each. That'd be great, and that'll be the last one. So Steph, over to you.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think it is quite difficult and it's quite tricky. And you know, just thinking about me and my role, it's a 50-50 role, but really it's a 100-100 role. I'm kind of doing two jobs. And that's almost something I had to sort of just accept if I was going to lean into something and do something different to what my peers or others aren't necessarily doing, for the greater sort of I guess appreciation of my skills and my overall professional development. And so, you know, while I sometimes do kind of think, oh, hang on, if only I was doing this bit for 100%, I'd be able to do this, and this, or maybe if I was doing that side of my job 100%, I'd be able to do this and this. There's only so many hours in the day. It's almost accepting that to sometimes grow, it means having to do things slightly different. It means there are more demands on your time and what you are, feasibly able to do. But in the long run, it will all kind of come together, I suppose. So I guess short-term pain for long-term gain sort of mindset, I guess is what I'm saying, in my experience anyway.
No, thanks, Stephanie, thanks for that. And yeah, totally agree. And Ben, from your perspective, what are your thoughts?
On risk, there are ways you can manage it. So I like to think about, if you were learning to drive and someone said to you, there are two ways you can learn to drive. One of them is just to get behind the wheel of the car and see what happens. Get on the motorway and see whatever happens. The other one is to find a really experienced driver that has driven thousands of times before, taught lots of people, and follow that person's instructions, even when it's counterintuitive. Even when they say, look, when you're reversing, you turn right to go left and left to go right, you just see what happens. You follow those instructions. And that analogy, I'm pointing towards finding mentors, right? That helps to reduce the risk when you're going into a new area. And the question I normally get back when I talk to people about that is, well, the stuff that I love doing, I can't find any mentors around me. Well, from my perspective, a lot of the mentors I follow and listen to, a lot of them are not here, but they've got books, they've got, sometimes they've got audio that you can listen to. And so I think it's always worth learning, sometimes by yourself, but also learning from someone who's done it many times before. That reduces risk.
That's great advice and a pointer there. I think mentors, coaches, and sponsors are fantastic ways to help grow your mindset. So look, I know we're on the top of the hour now, and I just want to say first and foremost, thank you so much, Abiola, Stephanie, and Ben, for your time and your insights and your perspectives around growth mindset. It's been really engaging and really, informative. I think the audience have really enjoyed that. To the audience, thank you for your questions. They've been great. There's a resource pack that I mentioned at the beginning that will be emailed to everybody that's on the call today. So that will come through in a short period of time. And there are also links to the PwC career courses, resources that we have available, some further reading on cultivating a growth mindset, and a lot more there. So thank you so much for attending today. I hope you found it really useful. Appreciate your feedback, and I'll hand back over to our host.
Thank you everyone for attending today's session. There are so many comments coming in right now, just lots of thank yous. And as Tunji said, there will be the recording being made available, and we'll be following up through email with feedback and the resource pack so that you can follow up with further information. But a huge thank you to all of the speakers. You shared a lot of insight, and thank you for all of our attendees, and hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.